Welcome to the Dr. Pat Show. Talk radio to thrive by. Powerful, inspiring, and coming to you live, bringing you stories of people like you and me, busting through and living life full out. Get ready to dare to wonder what your life would be like if you knew you could not fail. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. It's so great to have you tune us in and turn us on. We've got a great show for you today. Deva, a relationship with the subtle world, part 2. Jacquelyn E. Lane will be joining me in a minute. Benny, first of all, I'm so thrilled to have this conversation today. And, you know, I want to say what I'm really struck by. One of our team members today had to evacuate her home in Oregon. So this is real, what's happening here on the planet.
If you don't mind me, what was the evacuation?
The fires.
Oh, it was the fires.
Yeah,
okay. There's many evacuations going on.
There are many
evacuations
the world, and there are many fires. Yeah. When Linda and I were coming back from Montana, we got to see it up close and personal firsthand. You know, driving back on I-90 and just seeing the beginnings of what we now know was a massive blaze. And I want to say to folks that are tuning in, I am one of the best love of fire rituals and fire. I'm right there with the people in the spiritual realm on the importance of it. And what I want to say to everybody right now, please hold back. Please, if you think it's a good idea, you know, to a big old backyard fire or a campfire or something like that, and you think you're in a place where it's dry, please think again. Because if you are anywhere here on the West Coast and Idaho and Montana was really like right up there, Benny, with us. You know what I'm saying?
100%, Pat.
100%. Please, please hold off. We have record-breaking temperatures across the country. Where is that? Flagstaff. Met a couple people in Flagstaff, and I was talking to them about wanting to take another vision quest and get myself out to Death Valley. And they said, 130 degrees. Seriously, Pat, do the ritual in your backyard. And I said, okay, I will. So I want to say to everybody, prayers are what's happening. You know, to the tune of 12,000 people showed up for a prayer ritual in California. They are showing up in Washington State, and prayer of all kind, not one particular religion, but people calling on whatever power and energy they have, whatever they have, that is going to help them understand the nature of things today and where we are and what we do and how we live. And that's so important in the world we're living in today. Do we understand our relationship with the world? How about a relationship with the subtle world? And I've asked Jacquelyn to come back because her book, the book I mentioned earlier today, is so filled with power. And I was rereading again in her book. And this is why I'm really struck by the message I'm giving to all of you. One of the hardest things that I have found very hard to watch, maybe because my mom died in a fire, maybe because of that. But in the book, there is a chapter called For the Love of Trees. And I was rereading this morning. And I'm so struck by the beauty, the power, the energy, and what happens from birth to death. And especially when we're looking at the organic aspect of our lives, you know, the things that are alive. Trees are alive. And it was so hard and heartbreaking and gut-wrenching to watch the most majestic beauty you've seen on a hillside or in a community disintegrate before your eyes. But what is it that we know about ourselves and the kingdom and the angelic realm, and that realm that overlights nature, but also our Deva gifts and our experience of being human here on earth? You know, what is it about what Jacquelyn has put together that can help us and hold on to an aspect of hope where we understand creation at multiple levels, multiple generations, multiple centuries, multiple times of life in the evolution of us? And today we live in a place where the evolution and the revolution are coming together. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to hear from a very special author, a very special person, someone that is bringing forth a powerful, powerful message that goes back multi-lives, that goes back to the place to remind us that we are the children of the eco spirit. We are the children that come forth and have within us all we need to make things well. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back with my very special guest today. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Dr. Pat Show, Transformation Talk Radio. And thank you so much for tuning in and turning us on. You know, I have to tell you this, Jacquelyn is joining us here today. As I mentioned earlier in the first segment, Jacquelyn E is the author of Deva, A Relationship with the Subtle World. And I was talking about something not so subtle that I observed here recently. But we're going to talk about not only what Jacquelyn has put in this fantastic book, but for me now, in bringing you back, Jacquelyn, I am really struck now again by how purposeful and relevant the messages are, so to speak. And every day I become more and more aware of that. So can we start off by reminding everyone, like you said, of what Deva are?
Okay, so Deva is a Sanskrit word. It means Sanskrit's an ancient language of India, and it means literally being of light. So for that reason, in the Western parlance, it tends to be referred to as the Angelic Kingdom. But what people don't normally realize is that the Angelic Kingdom, in this sense, goes from what we consider in Western religions to be angels, but it also goes right down that hierarchy to the nature spirits, because the Angelic Kingdom is also in charge of the nature spirits, and what we call fairies. But actually, it's even more than that. It's the active and responsive intelligence that's infused into matter. And by matter, it's really important in a paradigm of the book to understand that by matter, we don't just mean solid, liquid, or gas. We also mean subtle matter. So I think the best way I can describe that is we know that we experience solid stuff and we experience liquid and we experience gas, but we also experience our emotions, and our emotions are palpable. In other words, we feel them inside us, but we can also feel other people's emotions, and we'll get into that a little bit further. But we also experience thinking. And so in metaphysics, we have a recognition that that level of emotion, which we call the astral plane, also the plane of desire, it's got several names, is also matter. It's just subtle matter. And this idea that there's subtle matter as well as physical matter is absolutely key to understanding metaphysics. And I think it's also key to realizing that that's why scientific types of people have difficulty with some of the things that people like I am saying, because they can't figure out, well, where is it? You know, we can't measure it. Where is it? That's because they're not understanding that the universe is made up of all these different layers and levels, getting more and more subtle as you go on, and that each of those levels has to be accessed by a different level of consciousness. So if somebody has impairment of some kind and they can't access a level of consciousness, they're not going to experience it. And it's also wrapped up with our stage of our evolution as a species. So this subject is so big, so vast, and that's why it took me quite a long time to sort of pull it all together and put it into something comprehensive. It's been written about, obviously, over many hundreds of years, and there are some very, very esoteric books about it. You know, I've got volumes of them up there in my bookshelf. But what I wanted to do was to have a bridge between those esoteric books and our sort of normal conversation. So that's what Deva is. It's including the fairies, the nature spirits, and all that lovely stuff that we like to think about, but it's also about us and our emotions and our thoughts.
Yeah, and that's what I love about this conversation and why I wanted to bring you back, because sometimes when we have, let's call them subtle energies, just broadly speaking, there are things that happen in our everyday life that tap into something. Some people say trigger. That might be one word, but I think there are different degrees. So for example, I was sharing before you came on, my reaction driving back from Montana, and then this morning finding out one of our staff members had to evacuate her home due to the fires in Oregon. But I was sharing what it was like to drive back from Montana and to be part of that, to see right close to the highway, you know, to see nature burning, and you know, how visceral, you know, my reaction to that was. But then to come back home and turn on the news and just find out that was one small fire that turned into a I mean, there's a reaction to this that's uncanny. Now, take a look at the evolution of what's happening in the world right now. Some people call it an evolution. Some people call it a revolution. Some people are calling it a consciousness awakening. Some people, there are many things we're talking about. But the one thing I know, there is an energy of action happening, and we're not talking enough about it. It's almost like in your book, it's almost like defying gravity in a sense.
Sorry, did you say defying gravity?
Defying gravity in a sense, because we so believe we are the architects of every moment of our lives. No, right? I mean, we're like, wait a minute, I had a plan.
Yeah, well, we like to think that we have total free will, but of course we don't. Because, well, we don't for several reasons. But talking about nature, we don't also because what we don't realize is that the planet is a spiritual being as well. And it's got its own stuff going on, as it were. It's a body. It's the body of a huge spiritual being. And it is part of a huge spiritual being called the solar system, and so on. And we go on up and up and up and up and up. And it's got its own evolutionary path. And so when we see these great movements of nature, they're pretty terrifying because they actually remind us that we are not super powerful, and also that what we do actually can throw a big spanner in the works as far as our climate's concerned, etc. But getting back to the Deva, this kind of movement that you're talking about, and I actually mentioned it in the book. I became aware of it some years ago, and I was in a forest in Scotland, and I asked the Deva about climate change. And what they showed me was this absolute maelstrom of light particles, as it were. You know how when you see film of birds when they're about to migrate and they're swirling around in these great masses, and like as if they don't know which way they're going to go, and then finally they decide where they're going to go and off they go. And it was very similar to that. So what were those particles I was seeing? Well, I suspect it was what they call prana, which is, the sort of light life that sometimes we see as a slight sparkle. And it was like, but the feeling of it was this, like these huge forces that were gathering. And as you say, I think what we're feeling now is the impact of that kind of gathering that's bigger than us and outside of us. But at the same time, humanity's also going through one of its major stages, and we're told in the books that humanity's going through what's called the first initiation. So we are at the point of no longer being driven by our physical bodies entirely. We are more polarized. Polarized is an interesting term because what it means is that we are focused and identify with one particular area of something. So we are polarized now in our emotional bodies. And it's quite interesting because when I was thinking about our talk today, and I was thinking about, okay, how can we understand this? Well, one of the ways we can understand it is that emotion is the higher correspondence of water, okay? So we've got all this, I just talked a minute ago about solid, liquid and gas.
Yeah.
And each of these elements that we're used to using and having around us have higher correspondences in the subtle layers. So water is the lower correspondence of emotion. And our body is, well, I can't remember the last figures that they came up with, but I know it's at least 70% water, isn't it? So when we experience emotion, we're going to experience it in the watery parts of our body as well. And that's why it's not just a mental fear that we get when we see this big stuff like fires and so on happening. 2 years ago, we had a huge bushfire over not far from our place. We could see the flames from here, and I had packed all my paintings and everything into the car, and we were ready to go. But so but that's nothing compared with the fires that you guys are experiencing over there. So what we need to realize is that actually we're materially linked, because Deva is about the intelligence and substance. Our bodies are, and our emotions and minds are materially linked to everything else. So of course we're going to feel impact when these big things are going on, and they can also tip the scales in terms of mass stuff that's going on. And when I was thinking about this the other day, I remembered an incident. I was in Czechoslovakia with a bunch of Swedish foresters many years ago, and we went to a ice hockey game, and the ice hockey game was between Czechoslovakia and Sweden. And we were probably the only Swedish supporters in the stadium. And Sweden was winning. And before the game finished, probably about 10 minutes at least before the game was due to finish, the atmosphere was pretty tense, and you could actually feel it. And the tour leader, the Swedish tour leader, said to us all, there were two women, me and another woman, the rest of them all these Swedish foresters. And they said, the tour leader said, "We're going now," right? And he hurried us out of our seats and out of the stadium before the Czechoslovakian crowd, which was primarily men, and they were pretty riled up, before they got up, because he was afraid for us. And you could actually feel that raw energy of that crowd. And you witness it all the time if you go to a big football match in America, or if a rugby match here, whatever it is that people are investing their energy into identifying with. That's your team, this is my team. I want my team to win. And it's all this craziness about what we identify with, and we want to feel superior to the other guy. It's not very advanced, really, is it?
Right. But what you're talking about to me is, and I thought about this for today, I think we are now at the point where, even if we don't want to say this out loud, and I'm not saying that people do or don't, but let's just say maybe you don't, we have to do, as you say in the book, expand the picture. Expand the picture. And when we come back, I want to talk with you about what that looks like and how it is portrayed in the book, touching the angelic kingdom. Because I think we have gotten to the point where the pain, right? The pain of staying the same, I think we're here. The pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change.
Yes.
And so I think we are there, right? When we come back, what is the place now that we have been invited for eons? We have been invited into the angelic kingdom. And I want to talk about it from your perspective and from the book. We have been invited for eons. I don't even have a date or a number or a galaxy, but the door has been open, and we have not been able to fully walk through. I want to talk with you about the power of this, but also the purpose of this message of yours and of Deva coming forth now. You could have written this book 10 years ago. You didn't. You wrote it now. Let's take a short break, everybody. We'll be right back with my very special guest. I have to say that for those of you out there, I think Livy is probably showing you the book on Facebook, right? What I want to say is I have now been through this book 4 times.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. And every time I go through, I get drawn to a different part of the book. Today, by the way, there's so many references to trees and the fiery nature of things. And I'm looking at these words in parallel to the reality of the true fiery things that are happening in the world. But when we come back, is the secret, is the key in this last part of the book. One of the last parts, not the last part. But the door is open. What does it take to walk through? Stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back with Jacquelyn E. Lane and this fabulous book, Deva, A Relationship with the Subtle World. We'll be right back. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And by the way, we are taking your questions if you'd like. 1-800-930-2819. I've asked Jacquelyn to come back. Yes, of course, I'm referencing a book, but it's more than that. I mean, this is, how should I say it? It is a body of work. It is from, this incredible author, artist, educator, who has been spending decades studying metaphysics and the wealth of living and traveling and looking at what it means to bring the social sciences and what we cannot see, the subtle world, the energies of it, what it looks like to bring this all together. And if you want to find out more, you can go to Jacquelyn's site. Jacquelyn, what's the best website for people to go to?
Well, the easiest one to remember is this one with my name, that'll get you there. JacquelynLane.com, JacquelynElane.com.
Yeah.
But if you can't remember how to spell that, because it's a bit tricky, you could just go to tallpixie.com. Okay.
I like that. Let me tallpixie, PIXIE.com.
Yes. Yeah.
People are asking me if that's what I have going on with my hair now.
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
I know it's like one of those moments. The other thing, how can people get copies of the book?
Right. Depends where you are in the world. In the United States, you're fine. You can get it through the normal channels there, Barnes and Noble, Inner Traditions, Amazon, all those places. Ask your local bookstore to stock it, and then if you ask your local bookstore, then it'll encourage other people to look at it as well. In Australia, you can definitely get it from the New Dawn magazine. New Zealand is a little problematic at the moment because they run out of stock very quickly.
Yeah, I could see why.
It's taking a long time to ship here because of the COVID thing, and the UK I think is fine. All those channels that they have there, the equivalents, the Barnes and Nobles, etc., are fine. But for instance, Barnes and Noble are not delivering here in this part of the world now because of COVID. Anyway, but your normal channels, you should be able to get it, no problem. And you can always also write to or check out Inner Traditions or Findhorn Press, who are the actual imprint. Findhorn, that's Findhorn. They're the people that asked me to, ask to publish it, and they're owned by Inner Traditions. So that's the link there. But the question about the Angelic Kingdom, the higher Deva, which we rightly call Angelic, there's a very interesting legend that I didn't include in the book, but it's worth talking about here.
Yeah.
And that is that humanity to form humanity, the angelic kingdom, the Deva, the higher Deva, who as a kingdom are actually in advance of humanity. They're more advanced, right, than we are. They've been around longer. They were asked at the higher level, the great Deva lords were asked to donate a part of themselves so that we could have, so that there could be like a casing or a body made, which is the casing of our soul, so that our spark had somewhere to descend into and inhabit, and a place to descend into density from. So in fact, if you go along with that lovely story, Deva form the casing for our soul. And from there, it's like we bungee jump down into this reality here, okay? And then at the end of each incarnation, we go back on our bungee cord, we process what we've been learning, etc., and prepare for the next bungee jump down in here until we've got it, right? And this is one of the stages where it would be a very good idea if we actually got it and started implementing what we actually know, and particularly at the leadership level. And we need to be very careful how we choose our leaders, because it's pretty obvious that they can lead us astray pretty quickly.
Yep.
So, and we also need to realize that we are all in this together, that the surface color of our skin doesn't matter, because we are all souls, all created by the same creative forces, and we are all struggling with the same kinds of issues. We may be at different stages of that, but we're all in it together. And as for your saying about, you know, being on the sense of the precipice for change, as it were.
Yeah.
You're right. I've found there's a fair bit of cynicism from some quarters that actually we're still not going to do it. But there's a very interesting thing in metaphysics about the 25th year of every century. And it's said that at the 25th year of every century, the masters have a conclave. This is the ascended spiritual masters who are way, 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 way in advance of us. They have a conclave, review where humanity is up to, and decide what kind of assistance we need, what kind of kick in the butt we need, etc. And that 2020 has been heralded for some time as an important point, is the run up to 2025. And I think this is part of, this was brought to my attention a few years back, and more recently, that it was important that this book and other books and the things that we're saying came out at this time to prepare and to get humanity ready for this opportunity, because it's an opportunity to set the tone for the rest of the century. And are we going to take that opportunity? Well, I think that's, yep, it's up to our leaders, but if we have democracies, we have some power in that, but we also have power at individual levels in every single thing that we do, and everything that we do has a choice factor normally, that we can decide to use a paper bag or a plastic bag. We can decide to, you know, there's a million ways in which every day we are making choices, and they might seem to be irrelevant, but they're not irrelevant. And as far as getting in touch with this bigger picture and what's going on, I think it's really important to actually, for people to actually turn off their phone, turn off your digital stuff, and stop and feel the air around you. Actually feel things, right? Not in an emotional sense, but in a sensory sense, where you can actually sit under a tree for half an hour, or feel what does your building feel like when you're in an organization or when you're working. What does that feel? What does that organization feel like? Because every person in that organization is contributing to the Deva of the organization.
Oh, there's no question. Now, Benny, I'm going to skip this break if you don't mind. So this now, I kind of started with the end in mind, and now I'm going to back up a little bit, because one of the things that I was struck by the last time we chatted, and boy, I'll tell you, I don't know how you put everything in this book that you put in. But
it took me many
oh, I know. I mean, I know. Now, here's what I want to do, because you just said it. In chapter 8, you talk about emotion. Here's my aha. And you start by talking about human versus Deva evolution, right? Deva evolution. And so what you just described, right, with the idea of this angelic kingdom, is a part of ourselves and our humanity, which I believe in many of the, what do we want to call them? Experts have talked about for a long time. Even if you go back to Jung, Jung talked about, there's an interesting letter that Carl Jung wrote years ago, where he talked to Bill Wilson about how he felt he could not say what he really wanted to say about spirit. I mean, when I read that letter, 1961, right, or something, Jung is saying, oh my gosh, I was so misunderstood. That's probably why his hobby was chiseling rock. But we have to go through a new level of evolution for our emotion and our thoughts. And so in your book, you talk about these. And look, I have read a lot of things since I started my journey here, but I never thought about this as an evolution, because most people that talk about emotions and thinking, they want you to snap out of it, not as an evolution, but to all of a sudden, I'm this, now I'm that. And it was impossible for people to do it. Can we talk for a minute about our emotional evolutional and our mental or mind or thought evolution, and whether or not it leads us to a greater understanding of the big picture?
Yeah, it's got to.
I'm relieved.
Yeah, because and this is why I've included diagrams in the book. So
Yeah.
now, it's not as straightforward as a ladder that we're going up one step at a time, because people in different lifetimes, they develop different skills and interests and so on. And so sometimes we move ahead, a lot of people, for instance, in the science, who are very interested in science and rationalism, they get really, really good at that, but they haven't developed their emotional IQ, or EQ as it's called, right? So they haven't developed their compassion and so on. So let's just take that level of emotion. We can be, let's say we've got a friend who's upset about something. We can go along and we can sympathize with them. Well, how is that really helping, right? What we're doing is we're saying, oh yeah, I know how, oh yeah, it's dreadful, isn't it? So we're actually encouraging that emotion.
Yeah.
But when we're able to stay, and often friends will identify with that other person's, with their friend's emotion, right? And so they just encourage each other.
Oh, I know.
Place.
Yeah.
And instead of that, if if the friend who's coming to help is not identifying with the emotion, they can get above it, see it, a bigger picture to it, have compassion and discrimination, and these higher levels of emotion, because at every plane you've got levels. And so at the bottom of the emotional plane, you've just got plain raw emotion. But at the top, you've got all these wonderful things like compassion, understanding, forgiveness, all those things. So the spiritual journey is actually about changing your identification, what the things, the feelings, the thoughts that you identify with, from a lower one to a higher one. So obviously misery and wanting to have other people share in your misery is a much lower evolutionary level than having compassion, but in a non-identifying way.
Yeah.
We can explain it like that.
Well, let me tell you what my interpretation from reading this and exactly what you said. How have I've gone through a number of different scenarios in my life. Really, people, when I share my story of life with people, let's just say up to age 21, that's pretty much enough for them. They're like, oh no, don't tell me anymore. But I have been fortunate to have, I call them angels, mentors. My best friend, Linda, of course, who you know, her family, my stepmom, where somehow they knew that if they approached me with that first description of empathy that you just shared, I would never grow. As a matter of fact, I probably wouldn't be long for this earth. They knew early on for me that I would have to learn some other things, right? Now, I don't have a good word for it, but I know right now we're getting to actually experience it real time. I'm serious about that. If you talk to a woman who has not had a job in 18 weeks and her children cannot get lunch food, I don't think she is really going to want to hear, oh my goodness, I know how you feel. She's going to want to know, how can you get me some money or something, or this is what I'm doing for myself. So I'm kind of giving you a practical way that I see what you have in your book manifesting. And I'd like to hear you talk about that, because if I looked at your book as a process that maybe will happen someday, that would be one view. But I'm looking at your book and we are accelerating the lessons in this book now. And we are helping each other to get it.
Because we're getting well, and we're getting into the Aquarian era, right?
Oh yeah.
And the keynote of Aquarius is unity through diversity.
Yep.
So this is your group, this is my group, that's gone, finished. We don't do that anymore. It's not going to work now. And when it comes to, see, we live in a very different country here. My husband's got a degree in political science and philosophy. And he's just brilliant on political stuff. So in a sense, he needs to be answering this question. How do we address this problem of women or people who have lost their jobs, can't feed their kids? That is not just their problem, it's our problem. Because whatever happens to other people in our society, we are all linked by this medium of intelligence in matter, subtle, physical, whatever it is. We're all linked together. And this is one of the big things about sensitizing oneself to what's the quality of the energy of the organization I work for or that I'm part of. or the community I'm part of, the nature that I'm part of, the government that I'm part of, the society that what is the quality of energy that is going on here? Because that quality of energy is determined by what level of Devic intelligence we are using at any one time, right? So because the Deva Kingdom infuses all matter, physical and subtle, we can't have any human experience without using some level or other of Deva. So we are in this great sea. It's like being a fish in the water, and the fish doesn't know it's in water because it's never been in the air, right? We're in this great sea of Deva and we don't realize it, or we're in a great sea of emotion, or we're in a great sea of mental thinking, and if we haven't experienced anything beyond that, we don't know it's there, okay? Now we're getting experiences that are forcing people to say, oh my God, you know, this just isn't working. It's all horrible. And, you know, where's the light? What else can we do? And they are being forced. Now, individuals are suffering, of course, but the pressure has to come on the leaders of our countries, you know, you've got a huge country, we've got a very small one, we've got 5 million people, you've got 200 and something million.
Yeah.
But the pressure in every way has to come on to societies that are not looking after their people and making sure that everybody gets a fair go, that everybody can feed themselves, not just the Bezoses of the world and the, you know, the rich people of the world.
Well, I think you hit on something from one of our callers that called in. And the question, I think, Benny, that you put in here is, what can we do as a whole to fight this political scene? I mean, that's the short version of it, but it's this question from the United States here. And I don't know if the caller is on the call. I know we've got 2 minutes left, but this is the question that we were talking about, of the evolution of emotions and thought, because people do really we want to do something about what we're seeing here. And I know we've got 2 minutes to answer a question about the United States politics, but isn't this book, though, to provide us with solutions?
Yeah,
You know,
I think, you know, get together in your community, get your community talking about what is going to make things better, not just for them, but for everybody. And, you know, get the book, read it, see if it can help you, give some mind-changing ideas, but reach out to each other, regardless of what social class, what opportunities, you know, get together, feed the hungry, do all that stuff. Don't rely on churches to do it. Do it as a community. Talk to people in your street, your apartment building, whatever it is. What do you need? How can we help? What can we do?
One of the things that I want to just end with, and perhaps this is something that it's just personal to me, is one of the things I'm really struck by, especially reading your book again, is yes, there are some things that are hidden and are subtle, but we live in a world where we were given the ability to take this information and do something, to act in the world. And I think that's what you just said. There are things we can do to really stand for what we believe in and take an action. But there are also some guidelines in the book. Jacquelyn, thank you so much for today. Again, please tell folks how they can find out more about you. This isn't the only book that you've written.
No, so my website is tallpixie.com. It's the easiest way to get hold of, you know, to have a look and see what I do. Yeah, tall pixie as in long-legged, which I don't have. Yeah, and yeah, subscribe to my blogs, newsletters, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and people can reach out to you directly, because certainly the conversation does stir up things inside of all of us. so that I think, as you say, we can, as Deva says, we can emotionally evolve, and we can mentally evolve, and we can spiritually evolve. And maybe the bungee cord ride won't give us too many bruises.
I think it's designed that way.
I think you're right. Everybody, Jacquelyn E. Lane, I'm Dr. Pat. Stay tuned. More coming up on Transformation Talk Radio.